Same thing when I was a kid, no respect. The time my old man took me to the zoo, they thanked him for returning me. Kid, I was an ugly kid, too. How ugly? I was so ugly, my mother breastfed me through a straw. That's all right. I mean ugly. But when I was born, after the doctor cut the cord, he hung himself. My old man, he didn't like my looks either. But he carried around a picture of the kid who came with the wallet. Now, you kid, I know I'm ugly. Halloween, I open the front door, kids give me candy.
Good morning. It's Thursday, Delta Force Thursday, December the 21st, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have military shorts, motivational speech, the 33 strategies of war, and Inside Delta Force. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, the military shorts.
Robert Weil and Jim Levy were best friends growing up in rural Alabama. They had spent hot summers together playing ball, chasing girls, and getting in and out of mischief. Both signed up the day after Pearl Harbor, ready to give their all to their country. Weil remained stateside for much of the war while Levy was sent overseas. On D-Day, Captain Jim Levy was part of the Chemical Mortar Battalion that landed on Omaha Beach. He would survive the war, but never discussed it with his best friend Robert Weil. 50 years later, Weil visited the cemetery at Omaha Beach. He ran into an elderly gentleman, and they struck up a conversation. "I was here," the stranger told Weil, "part of the Chemical Mortar Battalion." "Wow," Weil responded. "So was my best friend, Jimmy Levy." The stranger was overcome with emotions. "Captain Jimmy Levy was my company commander. I was one of his platoon leaders. He saved our platoon." He was a freshman in college and had just entered rehearsal for the school play when he learned of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. He dropped out of school and enlisted in the Army, where he was trained as a radio operator and gunner of a B-17 Flying Fortress. He flew an extraordinary 52 missions across Europe as part of the 463rd Heavy Bombardment Group of the 15th Air Force out of Foggia, Italy. He was Technical Sergeant Norman Lear, and he would go on to be one of the most successful television writers and producers in history, creating such iconic shows as All in the Family, Maude, The Jeffersons, and Good Times, among others. Lear revolutionized television prime time by creating socially conscious shows that held a mirror up to society while delivering laughs, even writing several episodes of South Park, where the character of Cartman is based upon Lear's Archie Bunker. Norman Lear passed away at the age of 101, leaving behind an unrivaled legacy in television writing and production.
What would happen if Russia tried to take Alaska today? The U.S.'s response would change everything. Let me explain. Well, Russia is a lot closer to the USA than you think. Only 55 miles of sea separate them. In the 1600s, Russia owned Alaska, but they eventually sold it to the USA in 1867 for $7.2 million. But over the years, many Russian politicians have threatened to reclaim Alaska. It would be hard as they've failed to take even smaller countries, but it wouldn't be impossible. Here's what their strategy would look like. Russia could dispatch a maximum of 6,000 troops and a good amount of aircraft to take Alaska. However, this invasion would be met with a lot of resistance, since the 11th Airborne Division of the U.S. Army is stationed there. This division has some of the best aircraft in the world, with 36 F-22 Raptors and 54 F-35 fighters. Both fifth-generation stealth fighters are equipped with cutting-edge radar sensors to pick up any threat.
He fought heroically in Bougainville and Guadalcanal as part of the Marines' 1st Parachute Battalion before getting reassigned to the 5th Marine Division. He was among the first wave to land at Iwo Jima as a member of a machine gun crew. His name was Corporal Charles Berry, and after 2 weeks of intense fighting, Berry and his crew were ambushed by a ferocious Japanese attack in the early morning hours of March 3, 1945. With their position overrun, Berry refused to yield, engaging in hand-to-hand combat as his crew returned fire from their foxhole. It was then that he spotted an incoming grenade and without hesitation jumped back into the foxhole to smother it, saving the lives of 6 Marines around him. "How do you thank a man who so willingly gives his life for yours?" said one of his crew years later. "Not a day goes by when we don't think about Charlie." Corporal Berry was awarded the Medal of Honor for sacrificing his life for his fellow Marines. He was only 21 years old. Frank Carafa was a sergeant in the 10th Mountain Division and had been acting platoon leader when a new lieutenant was assigned to the group. It was April 1945 and the regiment was ordered to take Hill 913 near Castel Diano in the Apennine Mountains. The assignment was treacherous. The company captain ordered Carafa to lead the surge since he knew the men better, but the new lieutenant ignored the captain and took lead on the suicide mission. While storming a German machine gun nest, the new lieutenant was wounded badly and left for dead. Carafa risked his life and eventually got the lieutenant to safety. The lieutenant was partially paralyzed, but would live. Carafa would earn a Bronze Star, a Silver Star, and 2 Purple Hearts for his heroics. Sergeant Carafa didn't learn the identity of the man he saved until the next time they met in 1988, when the new lieutenant announced his candidacy for president. His name was Bob Dole. He is the only conscientious objector in American history to receive the Medal of Honor for bravery and heroism on the battlefield. His name was Corporal Desmond Doss, and he saved the lives of hundreds of men during World War II, many of whom had mocked and belittled him during basic training. As a medic in the 307th Infantry, he earned a first Bronze Star for valor in Guam, followed by a second one at the Battle of Leyte in the Philippines. But it was at Okinawa where his legend was immortalized at the Battle of Hacksaw Ridge. It would be some of the most brutal fighting of the war, and when a retreat was ordered, Doss refused, opting to rescue 75 wounded men who were trapped and facing annihilation. Though wounded badly, Doss refused treatment until all the men were safe. "I'm proud of you," President Truman told Doss at the Medal of Honor ceremony in 1945. "I consider this a greater honor than being president." In 2016, Doss's life hit the big screen in the movie Hacksaw Ridge. He enlisted the day after graduating high school and served in the 11th Airborne Division. He received a Purple Heart for wounds suffered during intense fighting at the Battle of Leyte and would return to his unit as they fought block to block for control of Manila, earning a Bronze Star. The gruesome reality of war would haunt him for the rest of his life, with the only release from the horror coming through writing.
Infantry Platoon, Philippine Islands, 1945. These are the faces of the young men who fight, and these men were the models. For this is the province of combat, and these are the faces of war.
He was Rod Serling, and during 5 seasons of The Twilight Zone, he would share a weekly morality play with America about war, injustice, government control, space exploration, isolation, and death. Coming up with ideas is the easiest thing on earth, he was fond of saying. Writing them down is the hardest.
In 1982, Britain was getting ready to retire its fleet of aging Vulcan bombers when a conflict thousands of miles away caused them to dust them off for what was at the time the longest bombing run in history. Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands on April 2nd, 1982. By the end of the month, 2 RAF Vulcan bombers were already taking off from Ascension Island for a non-stop 16-hour flight that would ultimately cover over 7,800 miles. In order to reach their destination, each bomber would need to be refueled in mid-air 7 times, requiring 11 tankers per bomber, each of which would also need to be refueled. Technical problems forced the first bomber to turn around, but the second bomber made it all the way to Port Stanley Airport, where he dropped his payload despite running dangerously low on fuel. Of the 21 bombs dropped, only 1 hit the target, but it was enough to knock out the runway. The RAF repeated the bombing run 6 more times, right up until the end of the conflict.
He's considered to be among the greatest outfielders in Major League Baseball history. He finished his career with exactly 3,000 hits. He earned 12 Gold Gloves, 4 batting titles, and a league MVP. His name was Roberto Clemente, and during the prime of his career, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps as a reserve infantryman in the 3rd Recruit Battalion, where he would spend his off-season serving on active duty. Clemente considered his humanitarian work and time with the Marine Corps more rewarding than his accomplishments on the diamond. He took nothing for granted, saying, "God tells you how long you're going to be here, so you never know what can happen tomorrow." Tragically, Roberto Clemente died in a plane crash while delivering aid to earthquake-ravaged Nicaragua in December 1972 at the age of 38. He was immediately voted into the Hall of Fame, and MLB established the Roberto Clemente Award for sportsmanship and community involvement.
Could Russia sink a U.S. aircraft carrier? It's possible, and how they would do it will surprise you. Let me explain. In World War II, carriers like the USS Enterprise and Yorktown held up in multiple battles and hits. The USS Franklin and Intrepid were known as some of the toughest ships in U.S. Navy history. But even during the intense sea battles, no American carrier sunk after sustaining severe damage. However, the weapons Russia own are a big threat to all aircraft carriers today. They have strategic bombers, surface vessels armed with anti-ship missiles, and a huge fleet of submarines carrying nuclear and guided missiles. But their Oscar-class submarines in particular are designed for attacking carriers using nuclear missiles and torpedoes. So why does the Russian Navy have only 1 aircraft carrier, while the U.S. has 11? Well, building and maintaining aircraft carriers costs a lot of money. Russia prefers to spend on other military sectors like nuclear submarines and...
And that was the military shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, an inebriated and habitual drunk driver gets arrested.
Alpha 224 Flagler, 1065, 1050 on that vehicle. It's going to be 100, westbound at Memorial Medical. It's Florida tag, correction, Texas tag, Romeo Sierra Yankee 0297, RSY 0297. It's a black Mercedes, signal 12.
I'm with them. He is turning into the hospital. 23.
Dispatch has been...
14 Flagler. Can you show me out with L 25, please? 10.
Alpha 224 Flagler.
Alpha 224.
The vehicle's still rolling. Can you go ahead and give us 1033 till further?
Flagler units, 1033 traffic on primary. All other units switch to teletype.
Stop the vehicle, pull over. Do it now.
110 is not switching, but he's not stopping. Is there anybody else in the down there?
Dispatch has been updated.
224, we got that vehicle stopped.
Denver, still in for hospital.
What are you doing? What? We've had our lights and sirens on since I-95, and you've taken this long to pull over. Any reason? Huh? Okay. You're driving all over the road, too. You're not maintaining your lane. You almost blew through that red light. Are you having any kind of a medical emergency?
No.
What's that? No. Okay. You may favor shut the vehicle off? Shut your vehicle off for me. Shut your vehicle off. Turn the car off. It is a very simple thing I'm asking you to do. Let me see your keys. Hand me your keys.
No.
Hand me your keys.
No.
Okay. Step out of the vehicle for me. Step out of the vehicle. Step out of the vehicle for me.
Come on out, bud. You okay? I'm still doctored for the office because I haven't.
You're good.
All right.
Come on.
You all right?
No.
What's going on? What's up?
What?
What's going on?
I don't know.
Well, I asked you if you were all right. You said no.
Correct.
So what's going on? Why aren't you okay? Why aren't you okay? What's going on?
So what's going on with you, Mike? 'Cause you're driving all over the road, okay? You ran off the road a couple times, all right? Well, no, it's not fine. That's why you're being stopped. And then we had our lights and sirens on behind you. You weren't stopping for us. So, like, what's going on?
I don't know what you said when you say things are not.
We got an ambulance coming to check on you, man.
426
Well, you're an asshole.
I'm not being an asshole.
Yeah, you are an asshole.
Nope, not yet.
Fuck you.
Okay. Well,
Fuck you, man. You're
put
an
your hands
asshole.
behind your back.
Yeah.
All right?
That's fine.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yep. Absolutely.
Took him showing his ass, man.
Fuck you.
I'm
Look at me, this shit.
Mike, you're under arrest for driving under the influence.
That's great. You're an asshole.
I know I'm an asshole.
It's Sunday.
And that was a little bit of an inebriated habitual drunk driver and taken off the road. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little motivational speech.
If the truth be told, and we were being totally honest, most of us don't like waiting. Particularly if we're waiting for something to change or something to get better. Waiting can be a very frustrating experience. But the worst kind of waiting of all is waiting on God. When God forces you to wait for things to get better in your life, for things to improve, to change, to reverse, and nothing is happening. And yet, over and over again in the Bible, we're told to wait on the Lord.
The most difficult place for you to be in life is in God's waiting room. In God's waiting room. Some of you are in God's waiting room right now. What is God's waiting room? When you're in a hurry for something to happen and God isn't. That's God's waiting room. Some of you are in a hurry to graduate. Some of you are in a hurry to get married. Some of you are in a hurry to start a family. Some of you are in a hurry to launch a new business, to close a big deal. Some of you are in a hurry for a big goal, a big dream, a big accomplishment. Some of you are in a hurry for all kinds of different things, and God isn't.
And one reason we get in a hurry is we think we're falling behind. Our friend is getting married. Our coworker got promoted. The neighbors moved into a new house. We got to make things happen. We're being left out. Well, here's the key. What has your name on it will not go to anyone else.
We don't like to trust somebody else's timing. Why? Because we lose control. And so we'd rather than trust God, because trusting God means, my goodness, I actually have to trust God. We'd rather go, listen, I like the plan and purpose you have for my life, but can we do it my way? And here's the funny thing. Now that I'm a parent, I recognize in my children that they don't like it to wait on my timing. They don't like to wait. They don't like to chill and be patient. But the thing is, if they would just trust my timing, they would recognize it's for their good. It's for them to be blessed and prosperous. And so you can live life frustrated, anxious, stressed out, angry, or you can rest and go, God, I have to trust in your timing.
Another thing you have to learn in life is that a delay is not a denial. There's a big difference between no and not yet. Now, immature children don't know the difference. You tell a kid, not yet, they start crying and having a hissy fit because they think it means no. They don't understand a delay is not a denial.
We all have things that we're waiting for, problem to turn around. When it's taking longer than we thought, it's easy to get discouraged, to become impatient. But sometimes it's not happening because we're not prepared for what God has prepared. You need more time to grow, to develop, to gain experience. Patience is developed in the wait room. Before you see what God promised, God will send you to the wait room. You may not like it. Other people are in the game, making progress. You're stuck waiting. You may not see anything changing, but something is happening. Patience is working. You're growing, developing, getting you prepared so you can sustain what God has coming. Don't get discouraged because it's not happening as fast as you would like. When He knows you're ready, what you give birth to is going to be much bigger than you've imagined. Maybe you've been praying, being your best, but you don't see anything changing. Have a new perspective. You're in the wait room. You're not falling behind. God has you right where He wants you. Now do your part and wait with a good attitude. Thank you that what you promised is on the way. If you will wait with the right attitude, after patience has done its work, you're going to see promises come to pass.
Don't allow a moment of agony to make you draw a conclusion about life prematurely. Because if you just keep on walking with God, God has a way of making everything all right. But He warns us that the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. Now, the term steps implies process. Means it's going to take a while. Because a blessing given too soon is not a blessing at all. I can give my son the car keys now, but had I given it to him when he was 5, it would not have been a blessing at all. He can't handle it. So would I be a good father if I gave him a good thing too soon? Sometimes my goodness is proven by my ability to say not yet.
You see, while you're working on your project, your goal, your dream, your vision, God's working on you. And God's much more interested in you than in what you're trying to accomplish. Because you're not taking your accomplishments to heaven, but you are taking your character. And sometimes God says, yeah, I intend to give you what I've promised you. I intend to answer that prayer. I intend to fulfill the vision, but you're not ready yet. I want you to grow, and when you're ready, then it's going to happen.
And I'll admit, I don't like to wait. I like to make progress. I like to get things done. But I've learned some things take time. So much is developed in the process. When you're doing the right thing, but nothing's changing, remember, something is happening. You're growing. You may not like it, but you can't bypass the process. David said, God, my times are in your hands. I not only trust your ways, but I trust your timing. When I'm ready, when I can handle it, you will take me to new levels of my destiny. Something may have your name on it. You know God has put it in your heart. But if it happens too soon, the blessing will become a burden. Sometimes God proves His love to us by what He's not letting us have. We just have to spend more time in the wait room, growing, learning to trust God, learning to keep a good attitude when things aren't going our way. The sooner we pass these tests, the sooner God will release what belongs to us.
You can never lose faith. When you don't see no way how, you have to buckle down and keep believing. God is always coming. The moment you ask God for something, he boxes it up and he ships it to you. It's going to come. He just don't tell you when. But he don't tell you when the package is going to arrive. So here's the deal. He wants you to stay in faith to receive the package, because he only delivers to Faith Street. That's how it works, man. Let me tell y'all something. Being successful is not a magic trick. You just have to learn the principles of success. I am telling you, your education ain't got nothing to do with it. Now, when you gonna ask him for it, and are you gonna wait for it to happen? Or are you gonna lose faith? Well, I guess it wasn't the Lord's will. How you know what God's will is? It all happens at an appointed time, but you have to stay in faith for the appointed time to happen for you.
And that was Trust God's Timing. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene.
The ancient commanders of armies, who well knew the powerful influence of necessity, and how it inspired the soldiers with the most desperate courage, neglected nothing to subject their men to such a pressure. The death at your heels tactic. In 1845, the writer Fyodor Dostoevsky, then 24, shook the Russian literary world with the publication of his first novel, Poor Folk. He became the toast of St. Petersburg society. But something about his early fame seemed empty to him. He drifted into the fringes of left-wing politics, attending meetings of various socialist and radical groups. One of these groups centered on the charismatic Mikhail Petrashevsky. 3 years later, in 1848, revolution broke out all across Europe. Inspired by what was happening in the West, Russian radical groups like Petrashevsky's talked of following suit. But agents of Tsar Nicholas I had infiltrated many of these groups, and reports were written about the wild things being discussed at Petrashevsky's house, including talk of inciting peasant revolts. Dostoevsky was fervent about freeing the serfs, and on April 23, 1849, he and 23 other members of the Petrashevsky group were arrested. After 8 months of languishing in jail, the prisoners were awakened one cold morning and told that today they would finally hear their sentences. A few months' exile was the usual punishment for their crime. Soon they thought their ordeal would be over. They were bundled into carriages and driven through the icy streets of St. Petersburg. Emerging from the carriages into Semyonovsky Square, they were greeted by a priest. Behind him, they could see rows of soldiers, and behind the soldiers, thousands of spectators. They were led toward a scaffold covered in black cloth at the center of the square. In front of the scaffold were 3 posts, and to the side was a line of carts laden with coffins. Dostoevsky could not believe what he saw. "It's not possible that they mean to execute us," he whispered to his neighbor. They were marched to the scaffold and placed in 2 lines. It was an unbelievably cold day, and the prisoners were wearing the light clothes they'd been arrested in back in April. A drum roll sounded. An officer came forward to read their sentences. All of the accused are guilty as charged of intending to overthrow the national order, and are therefore condemned to death before a firing squad. The prisoners were too stunned to speak. As the officer read out the individual charges and sentences, Dostoevsky found himself staring at the golden spire of a nearby church and at the sunlight bouncing off it. The gleams of light disappeared as a cloud passed overhead, and the thought occurred to him that he was about to pass into darkness just as quickly and forever. Suddenly he had another thought. If I do not die, if I am not killed, my life will suddenly seem endless, a whole eternity, each minute a century.
I will take account of everything that passes. I will not waste a second of life again. The prisoners were given hooded shirts. The priests came forward to read them their last rites and hear their confessions. They said goodbye to one another. The first 3 to be shot were tied to the posts, and the hoods were pulled over their faces. Dostoevsky stood in the front, in the next group to go. The soldiers raised their rifles, took aim, and suddenly a carriage came galloping into the square. A man got out with an envelope. At the last second, the Tsar had commuted their death sentences. Later that morning, Dostoevsky was told his new sentence: 4 years hard labor in Siberia, to be followed by a stint in the army. Barely affected, he wrote that day to his brother, "When I look back at the past and think of all the time I squandered in error and idleness, then my heart bleeds. Life is a gift. Every minute could have been an eternity of happiness. If youth only knew. Now my life will change. Now I will be reborn." A few days later, 10-pound shackles were put on Dostoevsky's arms and legs. They would stay there for the length of his prison term, and he was carted off to Siberia. For the next 4 years, he endured the most abysmal prison conditions. Granted no writing privileges, he wrote novels in his head, memorized them. Finally, in 1857, still serving the army period of his sentence, he was allowed to start publishing his work. Where before he would torture himself over a page, spend half a day idling it away in thought, now he wrote and wrote. Friends would see him walking the streets of St. Petersburg, mumbling bits of dialogue to himself, lost in his characters and plots. His new motto was, "Try to get as much done as possible in the shortest time." Some pitied Dostoevsky his time in prison. That made him angry. He was grateful for the experience and felt no bitterness. But for that December day in 1849, he felt, he would have wasted his life. Right up until his death in 1881, he continued writing at a frantic pace, churning out novel after novel. Crime and Punishment, The Possessed, The Brothers Karamazov, as if each one were his last. Interpretation. Tsar Nicholas had decided to sentence the Petrashevsky radicals to hard labor soon after their arrest, but he wanted to teach them a harsher lesson as well. So he dreamed up the cruel theater of the death sentence with its careful details, the priest, the hoods, the coffins, the last-second pardon. This, he thought, would really humble and humiliate them. In fact, some of the prisoners were driven insane by the events of that day. But the effect on Dostoevsky was different. He had been afflicted for years with the sense of wandering, of feeling lost, of not knowing what to do with his time. An extremely sensitive man, that day he literally felt his own death deep in his bones, and he experienced his pardon as a rebirth. The effect was permanent. For the rest of his life, Dostoevsky would consciously bring himself back to that day, remembering his pledge never to waste another moment. Or, if he felt he had grown too comfortable and complacent, he would go to a casino and gamble away all his money. Poverty and debt were for him a kind of symbolic death, throwing him back on the possible nothingness of his life. In either case, he would have to write, and not the way other novelists wrote, as if it were a pleasant little artistic career, with all its attendant delights of salons, lectures, and other frills. Dostoevsky wrote as if his life were at stake, with an intense feeling of urgency and seriousness. Death is impossible for us to fathom. It is so immense, so frightening, that we will do almost anything to avoid thinking about it. Society is organized to make death invisible, to keep it several steps removed. That distance may seem necessary for our comfort, but it comes with a terrible price. The illusion of limitless time and a consequent lack of seriousness about daily life. We are running away from the one reality that faces us all. As a warrior in life, you must turn this dynamic around. Make the thought of death something not to escape, but to embrace. Your days are numbered. Will you pass them half awake and half-hearted, or will you live with a sense of urgency? Cruel theaters staged by a czar are unnecessary. Death will come to you without them. Imagine it pressing in on you, leaving you no escape. For there is no escape. Feeling death at your heels will make all your actions more certain, more forceful. This could be your last throw of the dice.
And that was the next part of Create a Sense of Urgency, Chapter 4, from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Your being increases in the measure that you give it away. Put that on your refrigerator. Live by it. Every instinct in us says, no, take things to yourself. Hang on to them. Hoard them. Keep them. Make sure you've got enough. People want some, keep them at bay. That's your possession. But that runs counter to the basic logic of the universe, because the creator of the universe is love. We say God is love. Love isn't something God does from time to time. It's not one of God's attributes. It's what God is, right through. Love, therefore, is the secret. Love is the great mystery, the hidden truth of all things. And the way it works is the more you give of your life, that's what love means, to will the good of the other, the more the divine grace increases in you.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, government control of the economy, no matter on whose behalf, has been the source of all the evils in our industrial history. And the solution is laissez-faire capitalism, i.e. the abolition of any kind and all forms of government intervention in production and trade, the separation of state and economics, in the same way and for the same reasons as the separation of church and state. Unquote. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now it's going to be Inside Delta Force, and this is the last chapter of Part 1.
And so far, the value of the trip had been so much greater than the cost. When everyone was finished, we picked up the brass, cleaned the range, and reconvened in the mess hall back at the ranch for one of Whitewater Willie's fabulous full army breakfasts. We were a hungry bunch and did some serious damage to his menu that morning. Later, we gathered in the OTC bay for further instructions. Gerhard Altman spoke with us. Gentlemen, it is apparent from your current state that it would be senseless to attempt an after-action review of the culmination exercise at this time. Few of you would be able to stay awake, and those who did manage to maintain consciousness, I doubt would contribute much to the process. Therefore, let us gather tomorrow morning in this same location and at this same hour. Now take yourselves to a place of rest for some delayed but well-earned sleep. I will see you all on the morrow. Until then, I bid you adieu. Common sense continues to rule, I thought, as I gathered my things and walked out to the parking lot. In the Ranger Battalion, we always did it by the book and conducted the hot wash immediately following an exercise. Consequently, we usually gained little from it because we were so dead on our feet it was all anyone could do to stay awake, much less give the review the attention it deserved. Tomorrow we would all be fresh and mentally alert and able to glean everything possible from a detailed look at the culmination exercise. I really liked being in a smart organization. The after-action review lasted 7 hours. Each man's actions were gone over in complete detail, and everything that had happened from the time we left Fort Bragg until we returned was brought out and discussed. Mistakes were analyzed, and successful methods were noted. But this was not intended as the equivalent of a Chinese self-criticism drill. No one was going to be remanded to a re-education camp. The purpose of the review was to learn everything we possibly could about what we had just done, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We dissected problems, and we came up with solutions, and the whole group profited from what we learned. There is no better way for an organization to improve itself and move forward in a professional manner. But it is a process that must be fundamentally rooted in trust and mutual respect. The very instant it becomes a weapon rather than a lens for diagnostic analysis, the process is dead. Finally, it was over. OTC-3 had no further business to conduct. Jim Day sent a runner to Colonel Beckwith to let him know we had concluded the review, and the runner returned with the directive that we assemble in the mess hall in 15 minutes. The entire unit was gathered in the mess hall when Colonel Beckwith came through the doors with a crash. Sit down, he waved impatiently as he strode to the center of the room and leaned back against the empty salad bar. Well, looks like we got ourselves a bunch of new operators, country, he said, addressing Sergeant Major Grimes. Reckon now we're gonna have to do something with them. And it's high time they started earning their keep, 'cause I swear you boys have been about to eat this unit out of house and home. Now you can start paying back the cost of your board. He took us all in with a smile that swept the room from side to side. Mark this day down in your diaries, men, Beckwith thundered, and then he dropped his voice to a raspy, theatrical whisper. This is the day we've been working towards. This is the day that 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment, Delta, becomes an effective unit. We have now achieved critical mass. By the time we finish business this afternoon, we will be of a size and a configuration that gives us the means of accomplishing the tasks our great nation sets before us. Before I leave here today, I'm calling General Shai Meyer, the Army Chief of Staff, and telling him that Delta Force is formed, that Delta Force exists. Then I'm going to beg him for just 3 more months to conduct unit training before he tells the Joint Chiefs we're ready to go. But I'm also going to tell him that if the bell rings tomorrow, we can come out fighting. He turned to the unit adjutant. Now, Smith, call out the squadron assignments, and when that's finished, let's have a beer. As he concluded what for Colonel Beckwith was a short speech, the mess hall guys wheeled in several beer kegs nestled in trash cans filled with ice. It was an exciting moment. I felt like a kid at Christmas as I listened to the names being called out and the squadron, troop, and team assignments being made. I had hoped for a posting to a sniper team, but wasn't disappointed in the least when I was called as a member of C Team, Troop 1, an assault troop. Troop 2 is the sniper troop, B Squadron. Dave Donaldson had been designated as the leader of C Team, and he waved me over to join him and the other 2 members of the team. Billy Oswalt was assistant team leader, and the other man was Chris Cable. I had seen Chris on many occasions. He had helped Dave on the range during our demolitions training, but so far I'd never had the chance to speak with him. That was about to change. Over the years, I guess Chris and I came to know one another as well as any 2 men on Earth can. Boys, first things first, Don rumbled around the chaw of tobacco he always kept tucked deep in his jaw. Let's get at that beer before it's nothing but suds, and then we can talk. Chris filled 4 large cups and passed them back to us. We stood close to each other and watched the animated crowd of our friends and comrades. The room rang with laughter and jovial voices, and as I looked around, I realized this was a birthday party. We were celebrating the birth of our unit. Our conception had happened on paper over a year ago, and since that time, we had undergone a long and difficult gestation. Just as a cell divides itself, we had grown slowly at first, and then with an increasing tempo as life multiplied life. With inexorable growth, we had eventually achieved viability and emerged as a new phenomenon, a fully grown and reasoning predator, armed with fangs and claws and intelligence, able to run and to fight. We stayed that day and talked with one another long after the beer ran out. It It was as if no one wanted to leave. Unconsciously, I guess, we knew that this was a golden day, a day that would never come again, and we were reluctant to let it go. Now, as I write this, almost a quarter of a century later, I look back on that small place in time, and I'm glad to be able to tell myself I was there at the beginning, and I know all the heroes who were gathered there, many of whom no longer walk the earth. It was a rare privilege to be in that room on that day with those men. It was an honor to be one of the founding members of that brave band of warriors. It was an honor and a privilege for which I am extremely grateful and eternally thankful. For the rest of that summer, we worked like men possessed. Beckwith had promised he would give us 3 months of unit training before he announced we were ready for action, but the generals in Washington were breathing down his neck, so we looked at every day like it was the last opportunity we would have for preparation. We shot 8 hours a day. B Squadron went to the range every morning, while A Squadron was in the shooting house. We changed over in the afternoon. The snipers stayed on the range all day every day, and often late into the night. The shooting house took such a pounding that we had to rebuild the interior walls every 3 weeks because the internal frames were completely shot out. Previously, we had needed to rebuild the walls only every 10 weeks. I don't know how much ammunition we went through that summer, but in comparison, the following summer, when more than half the unit was scattered around the world on different missions, Colonel Beckwith called those of us not deployed into a classroom and chewed our asses for not shooting enough. He said we were screwing off, that he had checked the ammunition reports, and we had expended only 1 million rounds during June and July. To Charlie, that was ample evidence of slothful behavior. Each squadron ran a large exercise every 2 weeks, always at night, always including at a minimum a coordinated assault and a sniper-initiated assault. Different teams were designated to design the situation and prepare the scenario for each exercise. The point was to test a different problem and a different facet of the problem every time. Twice that summer, the entire unit flew out on no-notice exercises, each one replicating a different mission. The first one was an operation to recover a stolen nuclear device being held by a band of terrorists who were also holding a group of captured American scientists. We spent the week prior to that exercise at the Department of Energy's nuclear laboratories in Idaho Falls, Idaho, learning about reactors, nuclear materials, and atomic weapons. While deployed on that exercise, we had our first opportunity to work with the Department of Energy's NEST teams. NEST stands for Nuclear Emergency Search Team. There are 2 of these teams, NEST East and NEST West, and they are positioned on either side of the Mississippi. These are teams of scientists whose job it is to track down and locate missing nuclear materials or a nuclear device that has been smuggled into the United States. They are phenomenally good at what they do. I can assure you that as unlikely as it is to happen in the first place, it is virtually impossible for a nuclear device to be brought into this country and hidden for terroristic purposes. NEST will find the culprits and find them quickly. Working on this nuclear exercise, we got a bit of a start. We found out that our normal rules of engagement didn't necessarily apply to nuclear materials. Delta's philosophy of operation was that we would go to any extremes to avoid harming a hostage. But national policy dictated that when nuclear materials were involved, hostage lives were of secondary importance. The mission was to recover the material, regardless of the cost in human lives. But national policy didn't change either our mindset or how we went about an operation. We were confident that even in a nuclear incident, we could still save hostages. We hadn't worked as hard as we had just to revert to indiscriminately firing on a target. Any band of yahoos could do that. The nuclear exercise was also tremendously valuable in that we started to build professional relationships with both the FBI and the Department of Justice. We needed very definitive answers to the legal questions we would encounter, It was vital to work out the mechanism for defining what would constitute a legitimate role for the deployment of Delta Force on a domestic terrorist incident, especially since the Posse Comitatus Act forbids federal troops from being used for the purposes of law enforcement inside the United States. The President can, however, temporarily suspend the act if doing so is overwhelmingly in the interest of national public safety, and it's up to the Attorney General to determine when that criterion is met. This was just the first of many exercises we would conduct over the course of the next few years, accompanied by enough Justice Department lawyers to form another assault troop. The end result of our joint studies was the formation of the FBI's own counter-terrorist unit, the HRT, Hostage Rescue Team. As the FBI had provided us with much-needed assistance during our formation, we reciprocated by providing the initial training for their HRT. From that point forward, we maintained an extremely close relationship with them, even conducting joint training and sharing information and techniques. The next exercise that summer was a big one. It was conducted at a government facility in the desert southwest and lasted more than a week. The FBI created the scenario and provided the terrorists, and I can tell you that those guys make for some formidable opponents. They gave us a hell of a time. For our country's sake, I just hope none of those guys ever really go bad. That exercise culminated with Delta making a simultaneous daylight hit on a plane, a bus, and a building complex, an attack that was spread across 40 miles and stretched us to the limits of our capacity. It also resulted in our blowing up one of our favorite FBI agents. While he was playing the part of the terrorist leader as the bus was being attacked, a flashbang landed in his lap and detonated. He was left nude and smoldering, but thankfully he wasn't seriously harmed and continued to work closely with us for many more years. Early that autumn, we faced a modified version of that simultaneous attack exercise, which was considered our validation exercise. The test was administered by the National Command Authority to determine if we were ready to conduct operations if and when called upon by the President and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. At almost the exact hour we finished the exercise and were packing to return to Fort Bragg, a bunch of young students half a world away in the city of Tehran were taking over the American embassy in Iran and taking hostage every man and woman inside. That embassy and the people inside it, both American and Iranian, became the focus of our life in Delta for months to come.
This audiobook has been broken into multiple...
And so that was the end of part 1 of Inside Delta Force. And next week we will have the beginning of part 2. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.